Hello! Today was the final reveal for the Rastakhan Rumble expansion. That means we have about 40 or so cards to go through, so let's get right into it. First up is Mass Hysteria, 5 mana priest spell, force each minion to attack another random minion. And to the best of my knowledge, minions can attack other friendly minions. That means this card is a lot better when your opponent has a big board and you don't really have any. You'll force them to attack into each other, weakening some and destroying others. It's really hard to place this type of board clear because 1, it really encourages you not to have a board yourself, and 2, it's going to depend so much on your opponent's board state. If they just played the Hunter Spellstone, then this is probably going to be good. But if they have big minions and small minions, you don't know which ones are going to trade into each other, and most likely those bigger minions are going to survive. You'll be able to control your side of the board, but it's not a super reliable board clear, and for that reason, I think it's going to be a little bit tougher to play. And next up is the Beast Within. 1 mana hunter spell, give a friendly beast 1/1, then it attacks a random enemy minion. I think a lot of the times on curve, if you're fighting for board, then your opponent is only going to have 1 or 2 minions out on the board anyways. If you're able to single out a specific target, then you can use this card to guarantee that you'll get the trade. Even then, it's a 1 mana spell and it really isn't that great of a buff. I just don't think there's enough value in this card for it to actually see play. And next up is Kragwa the Frog, 6 mana 4/6 legendary shaman beast god with a battle cry, return all spells you've played last turn to your hand. Now, on first glance, this is not really the spell shaman card I was thinking that would bring this deck together. You're able to set up your previous turn by playing a bunch of spells, and then you can use Kragwa the following turn to get them back into your hand and possibly play them again. But I think the big value with this card is with Shudderwalk. Obviously, the Shudderwalk combo doesn't really require you to play anything else once you do get Shudderwalk. But maybe there's going to be some sort of meme deck where with Kragwa and Shudderwalk you can return even more spells to your hand. It doesn't really make the Spell Shaman competitive, but maybe there'll be some memes. And next up is Tree Speaker, 5 mana 4/4 druid minion with the battlecry, transform your Treants into 5/5 ancients. Well, look at this, druid is getting some Treant synergy. This card's actually pretty good, and I don't think it's exclusively for Treant decks either, because a token druid could also take advantage of this. You'll be able to combo this with some Treant cards right away to guarantee some value. Now the thing is, the 5/5s won't be able to attack, so really you'll want to first attack with your Treants and then turn them into 5/5s. I'm actually glad they printed a good card for a Treant deck because there's no way this is going to help any of the more competitive druids, but at the same time it gives you some hope that you might be able to play different druid decks. Next up is Scorch. 4 mana mage spell, deal 4 damage to a minion, and costs 1 if you played an elemental last turn. This is really solid removal for an elemental mage. Works in aggro tempo, and it also could work in control if there's enough aggro in the meta that they need this spell to remove. It requires a little bit of foresight, or at least just a lot of elementals in your deck, but it's some solid anti-aggro or anti-tempo removal for an elemental mage. Next up is Ornery Tortoise, 3 mana 3/5 neutral beast with the battle cry, deal 5 damage to your hero. There could be fast aggro decks like a Zulok that don't really care about being dealt damage to themselves, and they just want a good 3-drop. I think if you're making an aggro deck that doesn't have any good 3-drops, then this could be the card for you. Next up is Demon Bolt, 8 mana warlock spell, destroy a minion, costs 1 less for each minion you control. The cheapest this can be is 1 mana, and I think if you're playing Cube Warlock, then that's totally doable. Against other control decks, I think a Cube Lock can definitely use this. There just has to be enough other control matchups for a Warlock to want to use this. Next up is Flash of Light, 2 mana Paladin spell, restore 4 health and draw a card. I think if there's enough heal synergy in a Paladin deck, then why wouldn't you run Flash of Light, which can also draw you a card? Up next is Blood Troll Sapper, 7 mana 5/8 warlock minion. After a friendly minion dies, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. I think besides a Necrotic Geist and Defile combo, you're gonna have trouble finding value with this card. The stats are nothing special, and only so many minions are gonna die on your turn. I think it's too expensive, too much of a hassle, and it's not really gonna get you that much value. Up next is Blood Claw, 1 mana 2/2 druid weapon with the battle cry, deal 5 damage to your hero. I think if you're playing aggro or any tempo druid deck, this could totally work. The 5 health doesn't really matter at the beginning. They don't really have a great early game, so I could see a lot of druids running this just to try to clear early game enemy aggro. I gotta admit, it's not a bad weapon for Druid. Next up is Cheaty Ankle Biter. 2 mana, 2/1 neutral minion with lifesteal, and the Battlecry deal 1 damage. So the lifesteal and Battlecry combo guarantees that you at least heal for 1. With that said, the stat lines aren't very good, and usually you don't have a reason to run such a cheap card. It doesn't really have any other synergies. In aggro, it competes with Keleseth, so it's probably not going to see a lot of play. Next up is Serenaded Tooth. 1 mana, 1/3 rogue weapon with the Deathrattle, give your minions rush. Not only does this work in odd rogue, but you can still use your hero power to destroy this and get the Deathrattle right away. I just got to rank 1 with odd rogue, and I could definitely see this weapon replacing an early game 1-drop. I don't know if you would include 2 in your deck, but definitely 1, because giving your minions rush and being able to gain control of the board is a crucial part of any aggro versus aggro matchup. Up next is Halftime Scavenger. 4 mana, 3/5 neutral minion with stealth and overkill, gain 3 armor. So as opposed to giving an overkill minion rush, I think giving it stealth also works pretty well. You're going to be able to overkill pretty consistently with this 3 attack. I don't know if you're going to be able to get 6 armor off of this because most likely opponents are going to kill it, but I think it's a decent neutral card for anti-aggro. Up next is Pounce. 0 mana druid spell, give your hero +2 attack this turn. So with Gonk the Raptor, maybe this could do something, but there's like 40 cards to reveal here, so I'm not going to waste any more time with this card. 0 stars. Next up is Moshog Enforcer. 8 mana, 2/14 neutral minion with Taunt and Divine Shield. What are these stat lines? Taunt and Divine Shield is a really nice combo. It makes it super annoying to get through. Maybe you could actually get value in a Hadronox deck that uses Master Oakheart and then needs a 2-attack minion that they can recruit and then resummon. It's not a terrible card when you get it for 0 mana. Next up is Headhunter's Hatchet. 2 mana, 2/2 hunter weapon with the Battlecry. If you control a beast, gain +1 durability. Whether you're playing aggro or tempo, I feel like you're going to be able to get this pretty easily. Now, you're not always going to have a beast out on turn 1, so not getting that extra durability is going to discourage you from playing this early on. But I think pretty quickly you're going to be able to get a beast that either survives out on the board or that you can play with the hatchet on the same turn. I could see an aggro even hunter running this and helping them smark even more. Next up is Spirit of the Lynx. 3 mana, 0/3 hunter spirit with stealth for 1 turn, and whenever you summon a beast, give it +1/+1. There's a handful of ways that you could effectively summon a bunch of beasts and get a nice board buff with this card. At 3 mana though, if you really want to get a big play off this card, you're probably going to have to wait until the later turns. I don't think it's worth playing if you only get 1 or 2 beast buffs off of this. Even if it survives out on its first turn, you definitely want to have a combo ready to ensure that you'll get some value. I don't mind the design, but I don't think it's going to see any play. Next up is Dragon Maw Scorcher. 5 mana, 3/6 neutral dragon with the Battlecry, deal 1 damage to all other minions. I don't think 5 mana for a 3/6 is worth it. I don't think the Battlecry is really that powerful, and while the dragon synergy is nice, this would definitely be one of the weaker ones. Next up is Arena Fanatic. 4 mana, 2/3 neutral minion with the Battlecry, give all minions in your hand +1/+1. Hand buffing is now sort of in all classes. I could see some examples where this could work. The first thing that comes to mind is a Zoolock, but for any aggressive deck, 4 mana for a 2/3 is a really slow play. I think it's kind of an awkward time for hand buff right now, and while you can maybe try to fit this into some decks, I think it's going to be a pretty weak card. Next up is Halazi the Lynx. 5 mana, 3/2 hunter beast god with the Battlecry, fill your hand with 1/1 lynxes that have rush. Well, okay, this could work with Arena Fanatic, and it could also work with Spirit of the Lynx. I think this is a decent option to refill your hand in a hunter. I think it's kind of interesting that you're not really getting that many stats for this type of mana. You're paying 5 mana for a 3/2, and then 1 mana for each 1/1 with rush. It's kind of a slow card. I could put this somewhere in the middle of the pack, but I really don't know, so let me know what you guys think down below. Next up is Dragon Roar. 2 mana warrior spell, add 2 random dragons to your hand. Damn. This is a pretty good card. It's like drawing 2 dragon activators in 1. It's relatively cheap, and while you may not be able to play the dragons right away, it enables your dragon synergy with other cards you may already have. A dragon warrior might not have enough dragons, and while these are random, if you're not doing anything in the early turns anyways, you may as well play this spell. I think all in all, a dragon warrior can definitely use this card. Next up is Devastate. 1 mana warrior spell, deal 4 damage to a damaged minion. While executing Execute does cost 1 more, it is clearly better. While you could run both in a deck, I think the main use of this card would be an Odd Warrior. I think if the meta's fast enough, then an Odd Warrior could definitely play this. Next up is Arena Patron. 5 mana 3/3 neutral minion with Overkill, summon another Arena Patron. Alright, so this is Grim Patron's super disappointing cousin. Overkill is definitely not the same as just being dealt damage. You can't use this in any Warrior Whirlwind effects, and honestly it's not that great in other classes. But I think it would be interesting if maybe a buffing Paladin could take advantage of this card. They could buff the first Arena Patron, then trade into that, and then have another target they can buff. I'm not saying it's going to be any good, but I don't mind the design of this neutral card. Next up is Arena Treasure Chest, 4 mana 0/3 neutral minion with the Deathrattle draw 2 cards. So I think the idea with this card is that because it's a Deathrattle, there are decks that can take advantage of this. But even in those decks, is 4 mana just to draw 2 cards really that good? Maybe in Rogue, if they combined their Deathrattle and Shuffle deck, then you could also draw those shuffled cards. But I think there's just better options in almost every other deck to draw cards. This card's slow, and I don't think the Deathrattle is going to benefit the decks that can take advantage of it. Next up is Auchenai Phantasm, 2 mana 3/2 priest minion with the Battlecry. This turn, your healing effects deal damage instead. So basically it's another cheaper version of Soul Priest, but it only activates for the turn that you play this. Right now, I don't know if there's a deck that would play both, or really play either. And while there are cards that you can combo with this, even something like a Lyra or Combo Priest deck, I don't think it's worth playing. Up next is Banana Buffoon, 3 mana 2/2 neutral minion with the Battlecry, add 2 bananas to your hand. Here we go, it's the banana expansion that we've always wanted. Bananas, of course, buff minions for +1/+1, and the advantage to them is that you can select which minions you want to use, and they're also cheap spells. I don't know, there could be some paladin that tries to use this card to get their quest quickly. I think unless you're using the banana to greatly benefit you, it's going to be tough finding a play with this card. Next up is Booty Bay Bookie, 2 mana 3/3 neutral minion with the Battlecry, give your opponent a coin. So it's kind of like the equivalent of a 3 mana 3/3, except the 1 mana that you're not paying, instead you give it to your opponent. I think just by the averages, it's going to show that most of the time this card isn't going to be worth it. 2 mana for a 3/3 just isn't really that amazing, and giving your opponent a coin is just a better advantage. I think it's an interesting idea, but it's just not that powerful. Next up is Dozing Marksman, 2 mana 0/4 neutral minion, has +4 attack while damaged. Opponents will be able to attack into a 0/4 and not have any negative effect. Maybe they can't kill it all in one hit, but they can deal some damage with one of their minions and then sacrifice the other one. It's honestly not a terrible card, but I think it is kind of hard to use. I think you'd want to put this in a deck that most of the time would be able to activate its attack on the same turn that you play it. Or maybe you just put this in an Inner Fire Priest. Next up is Drakari Trickster, 3 mana 3/4 neutral minion with the Battlecry, give each player a copy of a random card from their opponent's deck. If you run this in an aggro deck, I don't really think there's any downside. If you're playing against another aggro, then their deck's probably going to have some card that can help you, and if you're playing against control, then adding a valuable card to your hand is still going to be pretty good. I think this is a pretty solid card, and it's also going to make for some fun gameplay where you get some random card that you usually wouldn't be able to play, and it could end up helping you out. I'm a little bit hesitant because I think some games, one of the players is going to get a hero card, and that's going to be a giant value boost, but I'm not really worried about that ruining the meta or anything. Hopefully this is one of those RNG cards that I end up liking. Next up is Former Champ, 5 mana 1/1 with the Battlecry, summon a 5/5 Hotshot. So this is very similar to the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan version of this card, which I think was 6 mana 1/1 summon a 6/6. It didn't really work back in the Gadgetzan days, so I don't think this version is gonna do well today. Next up is Gurubashi Offering. 1 mana 0/2, at the start of your turn, destroy this and gain a armor. I like this card because it's like a little minion you're going to try to protect and that your opponent is going to try to destroy. For some reason it reminds me of like a little mini game you'll be able to play for 1 turn. 1 mana gain 8 armor is pretty nice. There are options in armor gaining decks like Druid and Warrior that are a little bit better just because they're more consistent. I would have loved if this card was maybe a little bit more expensive but had a better reward, especially because this reward is sort of anti-aggro, but it's also something that you would actually want to get the turn that you play this card. It's a little too slow and the value doesn't really make much sense, but I love the type of gameplay it would promote if it was actually worth playing. Next up is Helpless Hatchling. 1 mana 1/1 neutral beast with the Deathrattle, reduce the cost of beasts in your hand by 1. So I think this could work in a hunter deck. They have the Deathrattle activators, they have a lot of beasts, and maybe it could lead to some interesting combos. I think with this card, Tundra Rhino and some Deathrattle activators, there could definitely be some sort of combo that would deal 30 damage. Still, I don't think a deck around that combo is going to be competitive. I don't think it's a terrible card, but it's not going to be something that drastically improves a beast deck. Up next is Ice Cream Peddler. 4 mana 3/5 neutral minion with the battle cry. If you control a frozen minion, gain a armor. So you have to control a frozen minion, which means it has to be on your side of the board, which means this might be for Freeze Shaman. Yeah, I don't know, you might be able to play this in Mage. There is that minion that freezes your other minions, and honestly the stats aren't that bad for this card, but if Freeze Shaman is the deck that's your best bet to see play, then you're probably not going to see any play. Next up is Regenerating Thug. 4 mana 3/5 at the start of your turn, restore 2 health to this minion. The stats are fine with this card, but you really do need some heal synergy in order for this to work. It has basic stats, and its ability is pretty basic as well, so that means it's probably not going to see any play. Next up is Rumble Tusk Shaker. 4 mana 3/2 neutral minion with the Deathrattle, summon a 3/2 Rumble Tusk Breaker. Now the 3/2 is just a normal 3/2, it doesn't have this Deathrattle, so it's not like this is going to be an infinite minion, because that would be pretty dumb. This card just isn't as good as Devilsaur Egg, and so while maybe some decks will be able to also include this, there aren't really that many Deathrattle activators. But speaking of eggs, we have Scarab Egg. 2 mana 0/2 neutral egg with the Deathrattle, summon 3 1/1 Scarabs. I'm really pushing that Blizzard gives the eggs their own tribe. This card has the same problem as a lot of other eggs. You could play this and get its Deathrattle activated right away, but you're still not really getting that much from this card. Nothing really beats Devilsaur Egg, and right now that's one of the better cheap minions to use your Deathrattle activators on. I love that they print an egg, and I hope they continue to every single expansion, but I don't think this one's going to see that much play. Next up is Serpent Ward. 2 mana 0/2 neutral totem, where at the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. I don't know, this one's kind of boring. Are there even totem synergies in the game? 2 mana for 0/2 is definitely not worth it. I doubt this is going to see any play. Next up is Shield Breaker. 2 mana 2/1 neutral minion with the battle cry, silence an enemy minion with taunt. There's taunt druid, there's Q blocks, there are definitely things that this can hit. I think silence is definitely something people are going to be looking for next expansion, but I think this requirement is just a little bit too stingy to actually see play. Next up is Spell Zerker. 2 mana 2/3 neutral minion, has spell damage +2 while damaged. I think Mage is probably this card's best bet, and I still don't know if they'll be able to take advantage of this. You can easily just ping this and then you get the +2 spell damage, but I think most likely you'll just want to play this and then run it into an enemy minion. It's an odd card because 2 mana 2/3 isn't terrible stats, and honestly the +2 spell damage doesn't seem like a really big threat. I think it's one of those cards that people might have to learn over time that this is a card they should prioritize. I think this is a pretty good neutral card and one that you might want to watch out for. Next up is Stolen Steel. 2 mana rogue spell, discover a weapon from another class. This is another nice stealing card for rogue, and I think the discover effect greatly increases your chances that you'll actually get a good weapon. But this only adds the weapon to your hand, you still have to pay to equip it, so I don't think this card is going to see any competitive play, but maybe in a test deck and for some memes. And last up is Wart Bringer. 1 mana 2/1 shaman minion with the battle cry. If you played 2 spells this turn, deal 2 damage. But the problem is you're probably not playing this within the first 3 turns. Shaman does have a lot of 0, 1, and 2 cost cards, but there's only so many you can put in a deck. A lot of the times you don't really want to hold on to 1 mana minions, you want to play them on turn 1. Granted, this one's really powerful when you're able to get the battle cry, but I think you're only going to be able to reliably get the battle cry when you're past turn 3. I think an aggro shaman could still take advantage of this card, but this doesn't work in even shaman, so I think it's going to be really tough. Alright, there we have it. All 135 cards have been revealed. The expansion's dropping on December 4th. I should have a couple of videos in between then and now, but I plan to be posting some daily gameplay, at least for a while after the expansion comes out. I am gonna have one other surprise right before the expansion drops. Thank you all for watching the reveal series. I hope you all enjoyed the expansion. I think I will. This one looks like it's gonna be a good one. But anyways, until next time, ta-ta.